in the previous lecture. And then we'll move on to discuss, data types. And basically the way we designed this material is that we have 4 lectures with Python on Python. In lecture 1, we sort of learned how to work with the OpenAI API to get the sentiment, right? That's what we did in the last lecture. Today, we learn data types. So we're going to learn how to parse the response data we got from OpenAI. We'll learn how to open files. We're going to load a bunch of documents, and then we would like to leverage OpenAI API to do text summarization. So the use case is that the marketing team may want to launch multiple marketing campaigns, or maybe they do social media. There are a bunch of things they would like to update with their customers on social media, and then they're basically getting ideas from the web, right? And creative writing actually takes a lot of time, and I think this is where generative AI can really help, even though it's not doing a fantastic job yet. You have to learn how to do the prompting. But our goal today is, assuming that we have 6 long blog posts or documents, right? And we would like OpenAI to summarize that for us. And you can limit the tokens, to be 60 or 100. So you can decide how long the summary you would like it to be. And let's see how well OpenAI can do the job. But we would like to automate this process, because I think in the next few years, AI ops and AI automation is going to be very popular. So let's learn how to do this today. So we're going to work with like for loops and things like that. And in lecture 3, we're going to move on to functions and modules. So we'll basically learn to sort of modularize the things the code we write today, and try to improve on it. And then in lecture 4, we're going to move on to pandas, because we're still working with the most basic functionalities of Python today. But once we introduce pandas, then you realize that, well, there are a lot better ways, to process data. You don't always have to start from scratch, because there are higher level, abstractions or library that can help make our life so much easier as a data analyst or data scientist. So that's sort of the flow, and we're in lecture 2. Okay. So the objective today, we're going to learn how to work with Python, the 4 main Python data types: list, set, dictionary, and tuple. And then we're going to learn the control flows, such as if, else, the control logic, and also we'll be working with the loops. I think we're going to just focus more on the for loops today, and then we will spend some time on the exercise. Okay. Quick recap. In lesson 1, we learned basic syntax and some key concepts for us to review. First of all, I think we introduced the concept of object. So everything in Python is an object, right? So objects have attributes and methods, right? And we learned how to access all the methods, right, and attributes available for an object. But Python also has built-in functions, right? Functions and methods are kind of similar, but function, right, is not associated with any object. You can apply to any object, objects in Python, right? So for example, we worked with, for example, the help function, right? It doesn't depend on any object, right? So you're going to directly call the function. But if you're going to work with a method, then we need to have, an object first. Let's say a equal XYZ. And then we know that a is a string. Then we can sort of work with the string methods, right? But these are basically functions as well, okay? But it's just not the built-in function. Okay. All right, and then we also, mentioned that keywords Python has a list of built-in keywords, and you can basically print the keyword lists. It cannot be used as variable names. So if you get the name error, just so you know that it might be making some silly mistakes, right? But once you get familiar with Python, I think you'll be able to avoid these. And then we talked about the string data types, and we worked with some of the methods such as substrings using replace, right? We can do string.count, and we can change a string to be all lowercase or all uppercase. I think that's what we did in the lesson 1. Okay, so we're going to move on to lesson 2 today. I'm going to pause here and wait for everyone to download and open the notebook. So I'll give you guys 2 to 3 minutes, and I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page. I'll go slowly today to make sure that you can just follow along, and just type out these commands, and this is probably the best way to learn. Okay, and I'll address some of the questions. Where can we find the file? So I believe Adam has uploaded the file to Discord. Adam, can you confirm? Okay, finally I can open Discord. Let's go here. Let me upload that again. Okay, so Adam has uploaded. You can go to Data Fundamentals on Discord, and that's how you download the Python lecture 2. And I'm going to upload that to Python material as well. Okay, cool. So it's in the Python material thread, and you can access from the chat as well. After you unzip this this folder, you should be able to see 2 files. One is the Python Fundamental Lecture 2 demo, and we'll upload the solution afterwards because we'll code it up today. So it may look slightly different from the solution, but I'll share the solution with you later. There's a very tiny file, data science career guide.txt file. That's what we're going to use for the OpenAI exercise today. Okay, and I'll explain how to work with it. If in your environment, it directly opens up a VS Studio, like VS Code, you probably double click on the notebook. And by default, it's using VS Code. I think that's fine. You can run Jupyter Notebook in VS Code now. Another way to do that is, I think I showed you last time that if you're comfortable with command line, I think what you can do is just run Jupyter Notebook, and then that will pop up, Notebook in a browser. Another approach is just open Anaconda, and from Anaconda, you will be able to open Jupyter Notebook. Okay. David has a question, so feel free to ask. I see you raise your hand. Yeah, David, so the solution file, I'll share that with everyone after this lecture. For now, I just would like you guys to focus on the demo. There's no code in the demo notebook, That's what we're going to do. We'll just go through that one line by line. We'll code it up. Okay. All right. Are we all set? Let's get started. Okay. So Python has 4 or 5 different, important data types you need to know. The first one I would like to introduce is list. Okay. List is pretty straightforward, and it's probably the most popular one. And you can think of it just as a list of things, right? When are we going to create a list? In real life, I do that every day. I created like a task list for myself every morning, even though I realize that most of the time I cannot get through the list. I cannot get everything I want to do finished every day. There are always things popping up, right? When you go shopping, you have grocery shopping list, right? So that's what Python list is about. So by the way, if you see create a list, right, you double click on that cell, that is using Markdown, okay? I think we introduced this in the first session in Jupyter Notebook. You can see that the type of this cell is Markdown. If you change that to code, then it becomes the code, okay? But in this case, it's Markdown. So you see this bolded font, right? If you would like to insert a new cell in between those two, you can hit A, right, to insert above. Or if you're not comfortable with the short key, then just go insert and insert cell above or below, okay? So that's how you add more cells, okay? To delete, you can hit D twice, okay? DD will delete the cell. All right, cool. Well, let's create our very first list. How about we create an empty list? So let's say data science learning path, okay? Now, here you're going to encounter the square brackets, the parentheses, and curly braces today. And it might be a little bit confusing at the very beginning, but you'll get used to it, okay? Whenever you see a pair of square brackets, that means we're creating a list. It's used for indexing, and it's used for the list data structure as well, okay? So when I create, this means it's an empty list. We haven't added anything into this shopping list. It's basically, you open your notebook, right? And you would like to create a new shopping list, and you have a blank page, and you're going to keep adding things to this list, okay? So you can actually run this cell already. So we're basically assigning an empty list, okay, to the learning path, which is the object here, right? So this variable, we can print that out. So let's say type learning path. So let's build a data science learning path, not the shopping list, okay? I think the shopping list was used in the WeCloud Open material. All right, so, but let's add something, right? Another way to create a list is we'll just initialize the list with some value. And list is mutable, which means we can actually keep adding things to the list, which makes sense. Like when we do shopping list, we'll keep adding things, right? So let's say data science learning path. I'll say you don't have to type exactly the same, okay? But here I'm just trying to follow what I sort of came up with earlier today. So let's say the first thing in the learning path, let's say learn SQL. That's something I would recommend to everyone, right? This is a string, okay? This is the first element in our list. And we would like to add a couple of more, okay? Now I'm going to hit enter to have a new line. It's quite, so it might be a little bit confusing sometimes if you're not used to it. Let's say we can go, let's go with a simpler example. Okay, let's say we have a variable named A, and we assign value 1, 2, 3, right? Add that to the list. But we can also do it this way. We have an empty list. Okay, you hit enter, and it starts a new line. Okay, you can basically do it this way as well. In Python, whenever they see like things like curly braces and brackets and parentheses, they will consider that as, as things in the same line, basically. Okay, so it doesn't consider them as, 4 separate lines. It's sort of, whenever it sees the left, this bracket, it's sort of expecting to see this bracket as well to enclose, right? And then it treats everything in between as, things on the same line. Okay, so you can do it this way as well. It will make your code look less messy, I think. So here's the example, right? So the first thing we would like to add to the data science learning path is learn SQL, and then I'll hit enter. Second is probably learn Python, okay? And they need to be separated using comma. So we are sort of telling Python that, well, this is the first element we're adding to this list, and this is the second element in this list, okay? And then we can add 3, what do we need to learn after Python? Let's say data wrangling. We need to know how to work with data, right? And then 4, maybe statistics, okay? I'm just gonna remove the learn, so it's easier for you guys to type. Right, statistics, and then maybe we move on to machine learning, okay? There's something else we can learn, but okay. We don't need a comma after the last element because, it ends with, the square bracket. So Python sort of know that you come to an end, right? So we basically added 5 things that we need to learn, okay? Put that in the learning path, and let's hit run. And now we created a new variable, and the data type should be list. Question for everyone. How do we verify this is actually a list data type? Or is there a list data type actually, in Python? What command should we run to get the data type of a variable? Hey, Burton, go ahead. Oh, I think it's a webinar, so we sort of muted everyone. Maybe you can just type your answer in the Q&A section. Type, exactly. So let's get the type. Again, you see this is green color. That is a built-in function. You don't have to import it. It just comes with Python. Every time Python is loaded, you get this, okay? So let's do learning path, and it tells us that the type is list. Okay, and of course we would like to check out the content in this list. So we can either just run this from the directly, or we can add print as well. It's not much difference here. We're printing out this list, and we get 1 SQL, 2 Python. That's exactly what we put into this list, right? All right, so we created an empty list, and this is useful. Okay, we'll talk about it later. And then we tried to initialize the list, right, with 3 elements, and now we just created a learning path. And you can see that you can create a list that has all integer values and all numeric values. You can create a list with all string values, but I'll tell you later that actually in Python list, it doesn't matter. You can mix data types. We'll discuss that later, okay? But now we just created our very first list. The next thing is, well, how do we access the elements in that list, right? Of course, we're going to start with this variable. Remember, when we create the list, we use the square bracket. Coincidentally, in Python, right, when you work with data type, you would like to access some value or element through index. Okay, we have to use the square bracket. And later on, when we learn, Python data frames, we're going to work with this square bracket a lot, like with data frame, with NumPy arrays, and with dictionary data types with Python list as well and tuple as well. Okay. When we add a square bracket after a Python variable, we're basically just telling Python that we would like to access something based on the index. Okay. And Python is zero index based. What does that mean? Like when we create this list, okay, the value here is sort of ordered already, right? This is the first element we put into this list, and 2.python follows the first one after the comma. So that means this comes as the second, and the third thing we put into this learning path is data wrangling, followed by statistics, right? So in this case, it's actually ordered. That allows us to access certain element by the position. So the index is basically the position. Okay. And Python happens to be zero index based. What that means is, well, naturally we think that, well, this is the first element. This is the first thing in this list, right? But it's index, okay? There's a numeric value that's associated with each element in a list so that we can access them by calling the index, okay? So an example here is that, well, if we type learning path index 0, that returns the first element. Okay, this takes a little bit getting used to, because why it's not like 1, but it's basically just how Python is created. It used 0 always to define the very first element, right, in the sequence. So index 0 means we're accessing the first element, and then we know that if we would like to access the third element, data wrangling, what should be the index value we're going to put here? If we would like to access the third element, data wrangling. So basically, the second element, Python, will be 1. The third element, data wrangling, basically will be 2, right? So increments by 1, so 0, 1, 2. And we have, I think, 5 elements. So the index starts from 0 and go all the way to 4. Okay. So let's just give it a try. The good thing about Jupyter Notebook is that if you don't know, you're not sure, why don't you just put down the number? You think it might be 2, let's just give it a try. And 2 returns 3 data wrangling. But if you think that's 3, it actually returns statistics. And you notice that it's not what you want. And then you change that back to 2, it's working. Well, that's how you learn Python, okay? It's, just trial and error. So this is how we access elements in a list. And there are some interesting things that if this is the very first time you come across Python, then there are things like, okay, how do we access the last one? Right? What if in your list you have 1,982 items in this list, but sometimes it's hard to memorize what is the index of the last element, right? But the nice thing about Python is that, well, you can just use -1. In this case, let's give it a try. It's 5 machine learning. So it means that if you want to start from the very beginning, index starts from 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. If you would like to go backwards, it starts from -1. So learning path index 4 is equivalent to learning path -1. And I have -2. And this will be -5. Okay. This will take a little bit getting used to, but sometimes, there's a good use case for this. So you can actually go backwards. Okay. All right, cool. And sometimes you can access a range of things, right? So let's say, what about, okay, maybe the question is, what are the top two things, or what are the first two things we need to learn if we would like to become a data engineer or data scientist? You got to be SQL and Python. So how do we get the first two? Right? And Python has this colon that allows you to express a range of things. So it can start from, let's say, 0. Okay. And how about we try, because we know it's 0 index based. So it starts from 0. We would like to get the first two. So maybe we try 1. So that includes 0 and 1. Let's give it a try. And interestingly, it only returns the first. So let's just update this to 2. Now it actually returns the first 2. Okay. Just so you know, when we have this, range filter in Python, when we have the 2, it's not inclusive. So it doesn't actually include index 2. So it means like up to 2. So it basically includes 0 to 0 and 1. Okay. Now, I guess this is the part you actually need to memorize it. But once you get used to it, it will become pretty straightforward. Okay. But even if you don't memorize it, just try it. Naturally, you would like to try 0:1. It doesn't work out. You just change that to 2. Okay. All right. You'll come across this a lot when we start to work with data types such as data structures such as pandas data frame, or maybe numpy arrays, because we also always want to slice a numpy array to get a portion of it. That's where you're going to do the slicing. So this is kind of like the slicing, which is providing the indexing based on a range of values. Okay. All right, this is how we access values in a list. Okay. Next, I'd like to teach everyone that Python list is actually immutable. What does this mean? Remember, we started with an empty list. Let's say we're going to create an empty list called learning path. Okay. This is doable, okay, and very common in Python. So previously we already created learning path, which is a list, right? And if you create learning path equal the square brackets, that means we assign an empty list to this variable, then learning path basically just has changed. It's still the list data type, but the value it's associated with it, basically the reference has changed. Okay, so if you try the ID of the object, it has changed. It's pointing to now a different value. Okay, so let's just print that out, and it's empty. Okay. This happens a lot, and sometimes you realize that, oh, I just overwrite my previous variable. So what should we do? Because maybe you would like to go back, right? So in this case, you have to just run this cell again. Okay. The good thing about Jupyter Notebook is that when you have a Python script, right? Assuming that these are all like in one file, in one script, and then you have to run things from the beginning to the end. But with Jupyter Notebook, you can actually jump cells. Like you can jump from cell to cell. You come here, create a learning path, empty learning path, and then you regret the decision, and then you would like to roll back and say, okay, let's come back here, and we run that again. Now, if you print learning path, you get this again, right? So it's pretty flexible and convenient. Okay. All right. But I'm still going to create an empty list. And now this is a very common use case, because sometimes you just don't know what you want to put in this list yet. So you start with an empty list, and you would like to keep adding things to this list. This is how we write a shopping list. You always start from something. And even when you are at the supermarket, you realize that you forget about like adding something to the list. You're probably going to get the list and add something just in case you're going to forget, right? So you're going to keep adding things, and sometimes you're going to cross things out. You realize you don't need it. So you may want to delete things and stuff like that. So you need a very flexible data structure for that, right? That you can keep adding things, you can keep deleting things, you can maybe change things, right? So that's what we're going to do. learning path. Okay. Okay. I'm going to try something, and I would like you guys to tell me. Okay. So basically what I would like to do is I would like to access, okay, so if you see the square brackets and 0, you can probably guess that I just told you that Python is 0 index based. So that means we would like to access index 0, right? Basically the first element, okay? And I would like to assign value, let's say 1 learn SQL. I basically would like to set the value, like the first cell, I would like to set the value to be this string. Not the first cell, sorry, the first element, okay? Do you think it will work? The best way to tell this is basically just to run this cell, right? And I can't believe that it took my computer so long to run this cell. But you get something called list assign index error. Okay, you are going to come across this error very often, trust me. And it's telling you that index out of range. But basically this means that this index doesn't exist, right? You don't have this index. Because what we just did was creating an empty list, right? We haven't put the first element into this list yet. So we haven't initialized this list yet. And now, even though the intention is good, we would like to create or put an element, right, in this index 0. But unfortunately, the way Python works is that it needs to know that, okay, you need to put something in this index, right, in this position, and then Python is going to complain saying that, okay, you don't have anything in this position yet, you don't have this index yet, right? So there are ways to overcome this, okay? But this basically means that, well, we haven't initialized the list yet. How would you make changes, right? There are 2 ways to do this. The first approach, so it's common to see this kind of errors, right? So maybe we'll do it this way. Learning path, we know it's empty, right? So maybe we'll do okay. Let me explain to you. If you have 2, single quote or double quote, right, without anything in between, okay, that means empty string. Just like you put the brackets together, it's like an empty list, right? This means empty string, okay? And then we can do, times 5. So that basically, creates a Python list that has only 1 string, empty string, and then you create like 5 placeholders, right? So we can do it this way. So let's say learning path equal, okay? Now learning path actually has something. It's not empty anymore. So if you access index 0, it's going to return an empty string, right? So now you can access index 0, right? And if you would like to add 5 things to this list, maybe you can just initialize them, even though this is actually not such a great way to do it. But I'm just trying to explain that. There are times where you actually know exactly how many things you would like to put in that list, in that data structure. Oh, you can do it this way, maybe just times 5, and then you start to fill in the blanks, right? So in this case, if we run learning path equals empty string times 5, right? And then we can start to do assignment. So say learning path, position 0 equal 1, learn SQL. right? And then maybe we'll do learning path. I forget about the second one, but let's say I know the last one is going to be 5, let's say statistics or machine learning, okay? Let's take a look at it. So now you can see that the first, right, index 0 and index 4, or the last element, we have assigned value, okay? But this essentially means that you can create a list and change or update the value in this list. And that's what we mean by list is mutable. Mutable means that you can change it, right? There are data types that are immutable. Immutable, such as, Python tuple. And once it's created, you cannot change it. And there are good use cases for that, right? We'll talk about that later. But list is very flexible, right? And that's why it's so useful. Okay, you can make changes. Okay. Looking at the questions here, what if we have a list of 1,000 items? And how can we access if we need item number like 856? If you know exactly what the index number is, then you can just do, let's say, my big list equal, and then you create the list, okay? And then you just use, if you know exactly what the index is, right? You can access it this way. But you may think that if you come from a data analytics background, you think, wow, this is actually silly, right? This is not the best way to do it, because in data analytics, right, imagine you're working with a database table like in SQL, and then you have like 1,000 columns, right? And sometimes you can add, your database administrators or data engineers will add new columns, or they remove a column from that table. And then all of a sudden you screw up the index, because let's say there's a column called age, which is column 5. But through some sort of update, they just inserted a new column, even though this is not the best practice. But let's say a new column got inserted, right, before that, then age now becomes column 5 instead of column 6. So relying on the index to access some column or some values is actually not the best way. And that's why in next week, we're going to learn pandas. I think we're more used to accessing, a column by the column name instead of the actual index, right? So column name is some sort of metadata. It's actually, better to access things, by column name without knowing the index. You don't care which column it is, but you just would like to retrieve the data by column name. That's something we're going to learn in lecture 4. Okay, but today we're still learning the basic Python data types. So that's how list works. All right. Well, let's move on and we'll come back to answer more questions. Okay. But list can be extended. What does that mean? So there's some data types where once you define a data structure and you say this data structure can hold 30 things, right? And then you cannot change that. You cannot add things. Okay. But lists can be extended, which means that you can actually like increase the list size. Okay. So one thing we can do is we're going to do, let's say, learning. Well, let me, okay, we'll type it out. Let's say learning path, right, equal, okay, 1 equal 2. It doesn't have to be exactly the same, okay, but let's say 3 data wrangling, right? All right, so we have this list. Now we would like to add something else. Let's say learning path. We would like to add 4 statistics, right? we can use something called append, okay? Okay, if we print that out, now we just appended a new element to the end of this list. Okay, and that is a method called append. Now, if you would like to get all the functions or methods that are available for the list, right, you can use dir learning path, which is a list object, right? And then you'll see at the end, other than those special ones, there's list.append. That's the first one, right? You can do copy, you can do list count, you can extend. Extend is similar to append. I'll explain that, okay? But there's also the pop and remove. We'll come back to this at the end, okay? But just so you know, this is how you can access that. Or in the Jupyter notebook, we can just run type dot and then use tab, hit tab. It gives you all the hints, okay? All right. So append is actually very useful and convenient because, you know, when sometimes when we do for loops and things like that, we'll start with an empty list. And then we might be processing another data type, like, you know, another list. And then we would like to process the data and then append the data to your list. And then you can just, you know, go through the loop and keep adding things to this list. So the list can grow over time, okay? Okay, when you work with list, there's another method, which is called extend. It's slightly different from append, okay? But let's give it a try. So let's say learning path dot extend. All right. And then we will add, let's say 5 machine learning, 6, let's say big data. Okay. So that what that means is that we would like to extend this list learning path by adding another list to this list. Well, let's try it first. And you see it added a new list. And it basically it's extending this list by adding the elements in this new list, right, into the learning path list. Okay, I think it's here. Okay, and how about we try append. Guess what's going to happen? I just appended the same thing, which is a list, 5 ML, 6 big data. So this itself is a list, right? So we have 2 elements and we're appending. So we can either extend or we can append, okay? So now I just appended it. Let me run it. Now this is what we're getting. This might be a little bit confusing, right? But this helps you understand the difference between extend and append. Okay, so the 5 and 6 here, they're basically, the data types are string, and they are considered as elements in this Python learning path list, right? So when you have a list of things, and you would like to add the elements in that list to another list, in this case, the learning path list, you use extend. And it's going to only add the values in this list, right? Now, if we change that to append, it's going to actually append the entire list as an element. And that's why you're seeing a list inside the list. There are a couple of things to unfold here. So first of all, we now understand that extend, right, is only extending an existing list with the values or elements in that list. Append seems to be appending whatever you give it to append, and it's just going to append it to the list at the end, right? And the second thing we learn from this is that looks like Python list accept any type of like data types as element. It doesn't have to be all strings. Looks like you're mixing the strings with another list, and that seems to be acceptable in Python list, right? Well, that's why Python is pretty flexible, like Python list data type, okay? And it can do it this way. That's without a problem. All right. So there was one question. What is the second way of dealing with the list assignment indexed out of range? Right. So let's say this is the learning path. If you want to know how many items we have in this list, you can use the length built-in function. It tells you that we have 7 elements right now. I'm just going to keep messing with this one. It has 7 elements already, right? So let's try to access index 7. And we're getting this list index out of range again, right? As I said earlier, if you would like to directly use assignment, then you need to make sure that this index is there. So when you initialize your list, right, you can assign some empty string, and then you can make sure that you create, let's say, 8 elements, so that you have index 7 is accessible, right? But that's probably not the best way, because what if, like, after you create a list of 8 elements, now you would like to add a value to, let's say you would like to add a bunch more, then so it's basically you never know, right? Unless you're 100% sure how big the list, like the list size doesn't change, then this is doable, right? Otherwise, you're always going to run into problems. So the best way is just to use append. So the second way is just to use append, and you don't worry about the index anymore. You just keep adding things to the end, and you can use extend as well. Okay. Okay. So let's say we would like to now just do the append then. So you don't use the index. You just append is a method of the learning path list object, right? So you're not going to do like something like this to append. You just run append directly after the object name, okay? And let's say we're going to add something else. And we can add a dictionary data type, or maybe I'll just add some integer here. Okay, and this list will basically keep growing. Okay, and we're mixing data types here, which will make processing this list later pretty unpleasant, right? So there are pros and cons, and we'll talk about that later when we start to learn pandas, because it's a much more structured way to do data analysis. Okay, but whenever you want more flexibility, you're going to come back to list and dictionary and some of these data types. Okay, and thanks, Burton. It did give an error. All right, let's move on. I hope you guys can follow. If I'm going too fast, just let me know. Okay. But I think this next one, I already sort of did that already. So list can accept heterogeneous type of data as elements, right? So you can mix, data types. There are other list methods, okay? Looks like we have things like, I mean, we're not going to try all of them. You can go through the WeCloud Open Python material. I think I have a table showing all the, all of these methods, but we can maybe try, what are some of the things that we use more often? Reverse, not really, but let's give it a try. I think sort is, is more used more frequently, right? So let's try the pop, okay? And we'll try to remove as well. Pop means you would like to delete something. But if you would like to try pop, but you don't really know how to work with it, because you don't even know, like, okay, what is the parameter or argument I need to specify here? Do I just run pop directly? And you run that, right? And it gives you 1, 2, 3. What does that mean? It probably just removes the last one, right? And then you start to get a little bit confused. And so let's try to get help. Okay, if you don't know how to use it, just get help. There are a couple of ways where we can use the help built-in function, but in Jupyter Notebook, remember I told you a tip, which is to hit the tab and shift key together. Okay, tab plus shift, and that gives you doc string. Okay, so tab plus shift to get doc string. But you have to sort of, your cursor needs to be on this, at least on this method. Okay. All right, so what this means is that looks like it, so first of all, it remove and return item at index, right? So it removes the item at that specific index, and default is the last one. Okay, that's why, when we didn't provide the index, it just removes the last one. And it also returns that, which means you're going to get that in the prompt. So it tells you that, okay, I just removed, 1, 2, 3. Let's just run that again. It's going to pop this one, right? And now if you print learning path, okay, it's going to give us 1 to 6. So that's pop. How about sort? I think sort is probably more used more often. So let's just run learning path dot sort. If we're not sure how to use it, I would probably always just try the parenthesis first. Now, here's another confusing part, to beginners, right? When are we going to use the parenthesis? Looks like sometimes we're using the parenthesis and sometimes we're using a square bracket, right? Square bracket is used when you're creating a list, right? Or when you're accessing some elements or items by index, okay? Whenever you call a method or a function, they need to be followed by the parenthesis. And sometimes you just provide some sort of name here without the parenthesis, and that probably means you're just accessing the attribute. So you're not really running a function, you just want to retrieve some data and information. We'll talk about that later, okay? The class attribute and stuff. But let's run dot sort. It seems to actually run, right? So now let's get the doc string. And it looks like sort the list in ascending order and return none, okay? So you can actually sort things by key and you can set the reverse as well. So let's try the reverse. We don't have a key here yet. We'll try that later. But let's say, what about we would like to set reverse? Right now, the reverse here in the parentheses is just a parameter, okay? It's called argument. And then once you set a value, then it becomes something called a parameter. Let's say reverse by default, looks like it's false. Now, we would like to try set that to be true. True and false, these are Boolean values, right? In Python. Okay, that's why you see it's bolded green color. And let's do that. And now if we print learning path, it's actually sorted reversely. Okay, which means if you access index 0, now it gives you 6 big data. It's not SQL anymore. Okay. So that's sort. Okay. Sort is useful. We'll come back later because what if, like in your list, you actually have tuples and you would like to sort by the second column and things like that. We'll talk about that. Okay. There was a question. What is the shortcut key to get help on a function in VS Code? We'll have to look into VS Code. I can get back to you this. Okay. Oh, you mean the Jupyter Notebook in VS Code? I'm actually not sure. Not sure if it's exactly the same, but we can find out. Okay. Or if you would like to print the doc string, then just get the help. Right, path.sort, and that sort of prints everything out as well. Okay. Another way is just to read the Python documentation online, and you just search like Python sort, list sort, and you should be able to find the doc string on the website. Okay. Okay, so that's it about list. We just learned the very basic things about list, but we haven't really talked about the use cases yet. So we probably, the idea probably doesn't stick here. But I think once we start to work with a file, when we iterate through each row in the file, and then also start to call the OpenAI API, I hope things will start to sort of, become more clear. Okay. But just a quick recap before we move on, because we did cover a lot of things, especially for someone who's just getting started, right? So let's go back. First of all, creating a list, right? We can create an empty list. We can also create an empty list with empty strings, right? Or we can just initialize the list with some values, right? But it doesn't necessarily mean that this list can only hold 3 things, because we know we can add new things to this list because list is mutable, right? To access the elements or items in the list, we can use index. And here we use the square brackets, not the parenthesis. The parenthesis is used with a method or a function, right? And Python is 0 index based. And you can use the slicing, which is providing a range, right? So you can provide the 0. But if you don't even provide the 0, by default, Python just means that, okay, you're going to start from the very beginning. So if you do this, Python sort of knows that, okay, you're going to start from the beginning to the end. And it's sort of just getting everything, okay? And it's equivalent to getting like, to -1, right? Oh, sorry, this doesn't include -1 though, right? It's non-inclusive, right? List is mutable. But when you would like to set or update the value, right, of an element in a list, make sure that when you use the square bracket and provide the index, that index actually exists. And you're going to see index error very often. And it's telling you that, well, you basically don't have this index yet. That's why you index out of range. Okay. So to overcome this, you can either initialize your list with empty strings, right? But this is probably not an elegant way to do that. So you can basically just use append and extend, okay? You can start from an empty string and just keep appending things to build up your shopping list, right? Or you can use extend, and append is going to actually append whatever that's there, right? In the parentheses, be it a list, a string, an integer, or even a dictionary data type, right? Well, when you do the extend, and it usually accepts, a list, right? And then it's actually adding the values in the list directly to the existing list, but it's not going to add the square bracket, right? So it's only adding the elements. In this case, they are strings instead of the list. Okay, it depends on the use case. All right, and then we talked about some other methods and how to get access to those list methods. Okay. All right. Now we're going to move on to tuple. And some people call that tuple. I guess it doesn't matter. And tuple is a very very useful data type as well. And I think I'll explain when we're going to use tuple over list. Okay, but it's kind of similar to list. Okay. I think by far you probably already know how to create a tuple or any kind of data type. You basically just have a variable name, right? Let's say, what should be the example here? But let's just start with a random tuple. Let's say I'll just name it T. Okay. Tuple is using parentheses because if you use a square bracket, then we know it's list, right? Now that's something you have to memorize, but I don't think that's a lot to memorize. Okay. Basically, you can have parentheses, you can have curly braces, and you can have square brackets. That's it. There are three of them you need to memorize. And tuple is using parentheses. Okay. Okay. I'm just going to give it a try. Right. So right now we have an empty tuple. Okay. But is this the best way to work with a tuple? Okay. Maybe we can try to find out if tuple has like, append. Well, it turns out there are only two methods. Looks like there's no append, right? So let's try to access this, and it says, okay, tuple index out of range. Okay, so maybe we'll try something else. We'll try tuple equal 1, 2, 3. Right? Now this is going to work. Okay. So accessing a tuple is the same as list. We use the square bracket, and tuple has the sequence as well, right? This is the first element in a tuple. This is the second, and this is the third. Okay. So we can use the index to access an element in a tuple. Now, the tricky thing about tuple is that it's actually immutable, which means you can't really change and update value in a tuple once it's created, unless you create a new one. Okay, so let's try. Let's say tuple 0. I would like to change that to be number 5. And it says you have type error. Tuple object does not support item assignment. Item assignment, like basically, assign value 5 to this element in the tuple, and it's not supported. Okay, so the error message is pretty clear and pretty straightforward, right? You read it and you sort of know, okay, that's the reason, because tuple is immutable. Once you create a tuple, you sort of don't change that. If you want something to be changed, you just create a new tuple. Okay. Okay. Now, but tuple and list, right? They're kind of similar because first of all, they're ordered. You can access any element, right, in a list or in a tuple by using the index. Right. The major difference here is that tuple is immutable and the list is mutable because we can keep appending things to the list, right? We can make changes of a list, an item in the list, right? But tuple, you cannot do that. Okay. In practice, tuple is actually more memory efficient because you sort of don't, you don't change or update tuple. So they're actually, when we create a tuple data type, there are actually less things for Python to memorize, right? And list has, is supporting many different type of like operations. So the list, when we create a list, like the footprint or the size in memory is actually bigger, even though if it's exactly the same data, list is probably bigger, right? So tuple is more memory efficient. Okay, and you don't change the value in a tuple. So sometimes when you're sure that you're not going to change it, right? For example, latitude and longitude, right? Latitude always comes before the longitude, right? And you don't want to change that. In that case, you're going to use a tuple instead of a list, right? Of course, you can use list to create like the latitude and longitude as well. That's fine, but tuple in this case might be preferred, right? It's ordered, and we know that we're not going to change that. Okay, so that's when you're going to use tuple. Okay. Okay. I think you know how to work with the methods of tuple, right? Just get the hint, and looks like it supports count and index. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. I think you can just read the doc string, and you'll figure out how to do that. Okay. A common use case of list and tuple is actually we combine them. So you can have something like this. You can create very flexible data structures, right? So let's say we have let's say Jack, age 34, right? Alina, age, let's say 22, okay, right? Emma, age 21, okay? So this means that we imagine this is like an Excel spreadsheet. Basically, you just created 3 rows and it has 2 columns, right? So Jack, Alina, Emma, these are basically first names. I know you don't want that to change. You don't want that to be, accidentally changed to some other value, right? Like integer value or something like that. And the second column, we know that it's basically integer, it's like age, okay? But in this case, we don't have the column name, right? That's where pandas will come in and become very useful. But we're talking about the built-in, the most rudimentary data types in Python, okay? So these are the data types that are very flexible, but if you want to do data science, you're not going to like it because it's counterintuitive. Excel is probably so much better in this case. So far, you probably think that it's not convenient. Like, why don't we just work with Excel, right? And you have to write so many code, and you have to memorize so many things. But it will come, it will become like more, it will make a lot more sense when we start to work with pandas. But these data types, they're not originally created for you to do data science, data analysis, or manipulating Excel spreadsheet, okay? But you realize how useful these basic data types are when you start to write more code and have more use cases. But they're not the best containers, or the containers, I mean, the data structures to store the data that you want to use for, like, data analysis, okay? So we'll talk about those in lecture 4. All right, so let's move on to another data type. There are 2 more to go through, okay? In the lesson 1, we covered string. Right? String is a built-in data type as well. Actually, speaking of string, I would like to come back and maybe just talk about string. Okay. Okay. Let's create a string called name. Right, that's my first name. String is actually a special kind of list, right? Because you can actually use index to access them. Okay. So that's something very special about list. Okay. Oh, sorry, string. So it's like a list, but it's not, with list, right? Things are separated using comma. With string, of course, you're not going to separate them using comma, but inherently, it's like a list. You can access these characters by the index, okay? But it's immutable, so you don't really change that, okay? All right, so since we're talking about list, I figured I'll come back and mention that list. String is also a special kind of list, okay? But it's not exactly like list, because string has its own unique, characteristics, and the methods are also very different from list, okay? That's a special case. Okay, now let's talk about set. I don't find myself using set very often, but there are some use cases that are just very unique. Like set is actually a very good data type, right? It's also very memory efficient and it's very fast. And the best way to use set, right, is for deduplication. Okay, so let's create a set, let's say, or let's create some list first. So the way to create a set is curly braces. Okay, let's say 1, 2, 3. It's kind of like a tuple is using the parenthesis. Okay, and how do we tell like if a data type is set or tuple? I guess you can just get type, right? Type S is set, and it's using the curly braces. Okay. Accessing a set. Oh, interesting. I said set object is not subscriptable. What does this mean? So it means that set is actually different from list and tuple, right? You don't really access any element by index, okay? And that's one of the features that actually makes set really good for deduplication, because if I create a set, okay, so I say 1, 2, 3, 3, 3, 5. Go ahead and create a set like this, and then print out S. You get 1, 2, 3, 5. This is not the case with list. Let's say I just use L, right? And I change the curly braces to bracket. What list gives me is that actually it keeps all the 3s, but with set, it automatically removes the duplicates. So this basically means that set does not accept duplicated, results, okay, or elements, and it'll automatically remove them. Which makes set very ideal for set related operations, right? And one of them is deduplication. That's usually how I work with set. Okay, so let's give it a try. We would like to use set for deduplication. There are 2 scenarios. First, let's create a list. Let's say data science skills. We have a list. Let's add something. So, data scientists need to know SQL, Python. Okay. Got the Tableau. Right. Machine learning. That's it. And I'm going to create another list called data engineering skills. And I have Python, SQL, say data engineers need to know AWS, maybe know Apache Spark. Okay. Okay. We'll print DS skills. And DE skills. Now I would like to create a new list, and then we'll move on to talk about set and how useful it can be. Okay, let's say combine the skills. If you would like to apply for both data science and data engineering jobs. The easiest way is just to use the plus, right? And this is how we concatenate two lists. And then let's print combined skills. Okay, so we have SQL, Python, Tableau, ML, and we have SQL, Python, AWS, and Spark. Now, we just learned some list methods today. Can someone tell me, other than using this plus, is there any other ways to combine these two lists? I'll wait for your answer. Extend, yes. Let's try that. So let's say DS skills dot extend D skills. Right. But this actually modifies the DS skills directly, right? Because it's appending the DE skills directly to the DS skills. So you better have an assignment. Let's say, let's create a new variable, right? Okay. Someone's suggesting loop plus append. Yeah, we can do that as well. We haven't covered loop. We'll come back to that. So we'll introduce loop, and then we'll come back and do, try this example again, maybe. Okay. All right, but that's not the point of this exercise, because right now we create the combined skills, right? And run this again. All right. You notice that we have sort of, SQL, Python for data science and SQL and Python, but what we need is just like a list of skills for both data scientists and data engineers. We don't want the duplicates. In this case, what we can do is, why don't we just pass it to a set, because set automatically remove the duplicates, right? So what we're going to do is just run set. And I just run combined skills. And a magic happen, right? It only keeps one SQL and one Python, it removes the duplicates. But it returns a set, right? What if you still want your results to be list? So what people commonly do is, okay, let's just do list, right? Wrap it around the set, okay? You'll get used to this as well. So first of all, both list and set looks like they are built-in Python functions, okay? And what this means is that the output of set combined skills, which is this set, okay? We're going to use that as the input or the parameters we pass to the list function, because this list function means that we're going to convert some data type to list. And set means that we're going to convert this combined skills list to a set type, and then we just convert it back to list, okay? And it just gives you the list. Okay. Another distinction here is that list is order, but set is not necessarily order. After it removes the, the duplicate, like for example, combined skills, it starts with like SQL, Python, Tableau, but after it removes the duplicates, it starts with AWS, okay? So it's not really sorted by the original index, because it doesn't even support index in set, right? Okay, so that's how we can use set, but set also has some useful data types. So let's say create a set, right? 1, 2, 3, and let's just get the data the methods of set, and it has a lot more. I think it even has more than list, but you can add things, you can discard things, You can calculate the intersection between two, for example, lists or two sets, right? And it just happens to remove all the duplicates by default. All right, so that's set. I think a common use case here is, for us to deduplicate a list, and that's used very often, and the speed is pretty good. Like the performance is very fast. Okay. All right, so we covered the list, and we talked about the tuple, and we just went through the set, right? So again, just to recap, because as we go through more of these, it might get a little bit confusing. So list is probably the most flexible, right? It's mutable. You can make changes, you can add things to your list, and the elements in the list, they don't have to be the same data type. You can have list in the list, you can have a tuple in the list, you can have a string, a tuple, and a list in a list, right? Very flexible. Okay. And tuple is more memory efficient, right? And it's immutable. Once tuple is created, you don't get to change it. Okay. Set, it doesn't keep duplicates. So that means we can use a set to dedupe a list. All right. Okay. Next, we're going to talk about the last data type that we would like to introduce for Python, and also one of the most popular and most powerful data types. And that is also directly related to the OpenAI API response we're going to get, which is usually a dictionary or a JSON object, right? And JSON, when you convert that to Python data type, it's the dictionary data type. Okay, and it has more bells and whistles because it's a little bit more complex compared to list, because list is very straightforward. So let's get started with dictionary. We're going to create a dictionary called job success key factors. And by the way, you'll notice that when I write Python code, like the variable name is really very long. But this is actually suggested. So Python, has this philosophy that variable names can be very long, but it needs to be like very clear. And when people read your code, they understand what this variable is about, right? Because we tend to have the habit of just say, oh, this is X, and we have another Y value, but you understand what you're doing here. And 3 months later, you may have forgotten. And the worst case is somebody else is reading your code. If you're not, providing enough comments, right, annotating your code, and then people will not be able to understand your code. So you're doing other people and also yourself a favor, because it's quite possible that 6 months later you come back to an old project, you would like to improve on things, then you realize that you're spending more time just trying to understand and recap what you did 3 months ago, right? Especially when the project gets more complex. Okay, so in this case, the different naming conventions, but Python sort of prefers that each word, right, the words can be separated using underscore instead of just putting them all together. It's a little bit harder to read, right? And they don't use like the uppercase and lowercase to sort of separate, make the distinction. Let's just add underscore and just be consistent with that. Okay. Okay, let's create a new dictionary. One of the confusing part, right, when we create a dictionary, since we just learned the set, is that, okay, it's using curly braces as well. Okay, but the difference between set and dictionary is that dictionary is something, using something called key value pairs. Okay, which means that we need to provide a key and also associated value. Now, this is getting closer to Excel. So what I mean by this is that when we work with Excel, right, the first row is basically column names. So we'll have age, let's say, have ID, name. Let me convert this to Markdown, right? Let's say ID, name, age, gender, right? And then you start the second row, let's say ID 1, right? Name, ABC, age, 12, right? Female, okay? Right, and then you just move on to the second customer, right? XYZ, okay? 45, male. So basically ID is basically the column name of the first column, right? And then so we have ID, name, age, and gender. Okay, so far with list, set, and tuple, we don't have that. So the tricky part is that when you want to do data analysis where you have 1 million rows and you have 500 columns, it's a nightmare to manage that directly using Python list, right? A list is good when you want to do batch processing, like you basically have 5 million rows and you just want to go through that 5 million elements in the list and do exactly the same thing and apply them to each element. That's something list is really good at, right? And that's why we need to learn for loops. Okay, we'll talk about that shortly. But dictionary, it has the keys, and sometimes I tend to think of the keys just as column names. It's just providing you more context, and associated with the key is basically the values, and they are called key value pairs. In order to access the value, you need to provide the key. But the key here is not like the numeric index that we use in list and tuple, right? It could be actually be a string. Okay, so let's say we're going to create job success, key factors. What are some of the key factors? Well, or key skills, right? Let's say you need to know coding. Okay, this is okay. So the colon here separates the key from the value. Right? Let's say we need to know SQL, Python. Okay. So this is a dictionary, and we use the curly braces to tell that it's a dictionary. And then the difference between this and set is that, well, in dictionary, you're going to have the colon, and you have the keys on the left, and you have the value on the right-hand side. Okay, let's finish this. And then to separate different key value pairs, we use comma, just like the comma we use in list and tuple. Okay. So we have coding. The second skill we need to have maybe is data analysis, let's say, right? Analytics. Okay. You need to have analytics skills. And here maybe we'll say that, let's say data wrangling and data visualization. Okay. And maybe statistics. All right. There's some other key value pairs, but now you're bringing meanings to the values in this container or in this data structure. Because when we look at SQL and Python, we know, oh, it's actually a coding skill you need to have. Wrangling, it's analytics related, right? Okay, so let's say we also need to have ML skills, right? So we need to know, let's say, regression, classification. Okay, the list can be really long. But let's say we also need to have some business skills, right? We need to have good communication skills. We need to have maybe project management skills, right? All right, that's it. So this is a dictionary that we created. whenever we start to work with like dictionary data type, the first thing I would usually do is I'm just curious about the keys. Like, what are some of the keys that are defined with this data type, right? Because without knowing the keys, there's no way you can actually know how to access the data, the value. You have to know the keys, right? So in this case, I'm just going to run. Well, first of all, let's use the tab to access some of the methods, right? So we have clear, copy, from keys, get, items, keys. Let's try keys. Remember, it's a method. So we need to add a parenthesis. And that gives you a list of all the keys: coding, analytics, ML, and business, okay? And we can get all the values as well, but we're just running dot values. That basically returns all the values in a list as well, right? So the output of these, methods are actually lists, okay? And because the value of associated with the coding is actually a list itself, so that's why what's returned is a list of list. And it can run another method called items. It returns both keys and values. Okay, but because we're not accessing this through the key value pairs, we're not providing the keys, right? We just would like to get all the key value pairs returned in a list. That's what we get. Okay, it returns as an item, but this is basically a list. Even though it says it's dictionary items, it works like a list. Okay, and you see the square bracket here. And what is the data type of this? Exactly. It's a list of tuples, right? So I found that tuple is sort of when you have structured data, let's say you have data that has 5 columns, tuple is a good data structure for that. Okay. List, when you want to add random things to a list, right? But of course, you can have a list of list as well. Okay. But in this case, it's returned as a list of tuple. This is the first tuple. This is the second tuple. And in the tuple, it includes the key and it includes, right, the values. And they're separated using comma. It's not using the colon because it's not a dictionary. We're returning a list of tuples in this case. Okay. And what's the use case of this? Well, usually when you have a dictionary, right, the most common use case is that, okay, I just want to retrieve a list of analytic skills. Just tell me, okay, what are the analytic skills I need to have? Then you just provide, right? So that comes to the next portion, which is how do we access the keys and values, right? So we basically get a list of keys, so you know what keys are available, and then you just, again, using the index. The index here is not the numerical, like the sequence index, right? It's just providing the keys. So let's say analytics. So this will return a list, which is the value, right? It returns wrangling, visualization, and statistics. What about the business skills we need to have? Okay. Communications, project management. Again, keep in mind that it's dictionary, but we still need to use a square bracket. Sort of use this as an index. It's not a numeric index anymore. It's like a string index, right? You can still use this to access certain value. Okay, even though you don't, right? And one thing to keep in mind that is, a dictionary is not sorted, is not ordered. Right? And that's why you don't use the numeric index. You're going to provide the keys. It's not guaranteed that they're always going to be sorted in the same sequence. Okay. So sometimes when you convert, let's say, a list of tuple back to into a dictionary, the order will change. okay, when you print out the dictionary, but it doesn't matter because you're never going to use the numeric index like, 0, 1, 2 to access things or the values in the dictionary. You're always going to provide the key, right? Okay, so that's how we create a dictionary, right? And then how we access a list of keys and how we access all the key value pairs so that you can actually write a for loop to iterate through all the key value pairs. And sometimes you may want to do that, okay? And we'll have to introduce the loop first. So hang there, we're almost there, talking about loops. And accessing the keys and values, we can just use the square bracket and provide the key. But what about, let's say, so these are the keys: coding, analytics, machine learning, business. What else data scientists need to know? Maybe math. I'll just something random. Let's say math, right? Or let's say big data. It says key error, right? But apparently we don't have this key. Okay. But what about we would like to sort of so I think what I meant to say here is that, okay, so you're going to come across this key error message very often as well. It's basically just telling you that you're working with a dictionary, but the key you're trying to work with does not exist, and your program is going to halt, which means it stops because it ran into error. But if you're running multiple lines of code or running a script, your entire program is going to stop, right? And you have to fix the problem and just rerun. So you may want to try a different method, which is called .get. Okay. Now, instead of using the index, right, the square bracket to access key value pairs, you can run .get as well. Now, .get is a method. You're trying to get the value based on some index, right? Let's say coding, okay? It returns sequence Python, right? So you can use .get. Now, the difference between the .get and the square bracket, like indexing access, is if you try big data, it's silent. It means that, well, it doesn't complain. It just basically means that you didn't get anything back because there's no such key. And sometimes when you run programs, if you don't want your program to stop because certain key doesn't exist, you might as well just use .get. Okay, so there are use cases like that, but just keep that in mind, like, in case you come across this in the future. Okay, now, but how about, right, we have already created this dictionary. Okay, if we would like to add new key value pairs, what do we do? Right, so far today, we have worked with a couple of data types. We know list, you can always keep adding things to list. You can use .append, .extend, and tuple is not mutable, so we cannot adding things or changing things in the tuple. And we know dictionary actually is mutable, right? Let's say job success key factors, big data skills equal, you need to know Spark, you need to know AWS, you need to know like AWS Lambda, right? This actually worked. And it's because what we are trying to do here is that we're trying to do the assignment. Okay, so let's take a look at job success factors again, and we just added a new key value pair. Okay, this actually works for dictionary. So that's one way that, that you're going to modify a dictionary, which is adding new key value pairs, right? But the question is, what about we are going to deal with the same keys? We're not adding new keys, but I just want to modify the value part. Because let's say I just learned a new skill, for big data, looks like you need to learn Google Cloud as well, GCP, or maybe Apache Airflow, right? So what we're trying to do here is that we would like to add or append something to the end of this list, which is the value associated with this key big data in this dictionary. To repeat, right? We can use big data to access the value, which is the big data skills for a data scientist, but we would like to add new values, right? Okay. There are two ways to do this. You can actually try dot append, let's say GCP. Okay. So that means you're accessing the value part of this dictionary, and you're going to append GCP to the end. Another preferred way is just to use something called update. Okay. There's an update method. Update. You get the doc string. Okay. There's some rules here. If E is present and has a dot keys method, then does this. Otherwise, it's going to do something else. Now, in this case, let's say we would like to update big data keys and add a new value, or we just want to sort of, let's say, change the entire value. Okay. Now, what I just did was that I would like to make an update, right? I just provide the key value pair. What this means, first of all, this is a dictionary, right? I'm using this dictionary to update the key value pair here. What it means that, well, it's going to go find the big data key, and it's going to basically update the value with this new value. Okay, so it basically just replaced the whole thing here. Or you just update that with the new value, because now the value is big data AWS. If we'd like to get, change it back, no problem. We'll just say Spark AWS, right? Lambda GCP. Okay. So that's how you update values in a dictionary. Okay. All right. Looks like we covered everything. We went through some of the most important data types. There are more details in the WeCloud Open, Python course. You can look into those. There are quite a few slide pages that explains these in more detail. Okay. And this lab is more built around the OpenAI exercises we would like to do shortly. Okay. We're almost there. There's 1 hour left. I would like you guys to get hands-on as well. But let's spend 15 minutes to cover loops first, and then we'll move on to the exercise. Okay. It should not be sentiment analysis. I made a mistake. So we're actually doing something slightly different. So in this case, we're doing text summarization. Okay. All right. let's start with the loops. I think loops is always interesting and it's very powerful, and you're probably going to be working with loops like a lot. Okay. So the question here is, what is the total number of months it takes to become a self-taught data scientist? Right. So I basically created a list of tuples. I need to get comfortable with like mixed data types, right? Because list is, sometimes you call this a container, right? You can put a lot of things into this container, and the list container, you can put anything in it, right? Now, in this case, we put a list of tuple. So this is more like structured data. Where we know that, I'm trying to be consistent here. Like the first column, right? If you look at this column wise, the first column is, looks like these are the things you need to do in order to become a data scientist. And the second column here is more like, is the number of months or weeks it's going to take, right? I think months makes more sense. Okay. The actual value doesn't make sense. It doesn't matter here. But what we're trying to achieve is that we have a list of tuples, and we would like to get the second column or the second elements in this tuple, and we would like to sum them up. So we get the total number of months we would like to invest to self-learn data science, right? But let's begin with the the very basics, right? So let's say we're going to create a list, okay, or let's say friends. Let's have a list. List is iterable, right? In programming, it's called iterable, means that you can actually iterate through all the elements in this container or in this data type. Okay, there are data types that are not iterable, but list is iterable. Let's say Jack, Amy, right? Jason. Okay, let's say 3 of them are friends, right? And it's a list of strings. Okay. The first thing we can try is, why don't we just print out their names? We know that we can use print. If we print friends, then we get a list of friends. But what if we would like, we just want one column, like we want each row to print one name, right? So we sort of want something like this, okay? That's what we want. So now we're talking about looping, because it looks like we need to go through each element in this list and do the print, right? So here's the syntax. I should have made this bigger. For, okay, let me write it out first. Let's say for name, or let's say for friend in friends, okay? And then colon. And then I hit enter. I'm going to print friend. Okay, so this is how for loop works. For loop basically will go through the list or tuple one by one, and then this is a block of code. This is like so basically when Python sees the colon, it knows that we're basically creating a block of code, right? And that's why we're using 4 spaces, okay, to do the indentation. So we have to indent by 4 spaces, and whatever happens, right, with the indentation, that means everything here is part of this block, okay, which means they're part of the for loops. And until the next line is something else, let's say print friends. Okay, then it will consider that, okay, now you're coming back to, right, you're getting out of this, this block, and it come back to your normal flow, okay? Because the flow will change now, because if let's say friends, right, if you run this cell, the flow is, well, let's create this list first, and then it sees the for loop and it sees the colon, it says, okay, now we actually have to run the following lines of code until we finish the looping. So it basically will print the friend's name 3 times, right, for Jack. And then it goes through the next iteration. It goes through go to the next element, which is Amy. And then it runs the 3 lines of code because they're all indented with 4 spaces. So that means it's going to run that in sequence. The sequence now will change. It doesn't go from here directly to print friends. It actually goes into this block and it runs this block of code. And it has to print the name 3 times before it moves on to the next iteration, right? To move on to the next friend name. So let's just run it. Okay, let me delete these. So it prints Jack, Amy, and Jason. This is pretty straightforward, right? Let's just add one more print here. And as you can see, here's the sequence, right? We have to iterate through Jack, Amy, and Jason. So for friend and friends, so it's going to start the iteration. First, friend, okay? When we are at index 0, we're starting the loops, right? We begin with Jack, and Jack gets temporarily assigned to friend. Okay, now inside this block, friend now has value Jack, and that's why we got Jack. And to print that twice. If you add one more, it's going to keep running that. It doesn't go outside of this block yet to print Amy, right? Or maybe at the end, we'll add print friends, which is supposed to be a list, right? So as you can see, it prints Jack, Amy, and Jason, this list at the end. It's not going to print that here, right? Because it has to finish this block of code because they're all indented with 4 spaces. Okay. And then it moves on to the next friend, which is Amy, and then finish Jason. And then it jumps out of this block and it comes back to the regular flow. And it goes on to print the friends, which is a list. Okay. So that's how for loops work. And now let's try to figure out this use case here. We have a list of tuples, right? We would like to access the second element in that tuple, which is the months it takes to learn SQL, learn Python, and learn machine learning. And we would like to add them up to get the total, right? So there are different ways to do that. Let's try the first approach. Okay. I'm going to give you some guidance here, and then I'm going to move on to the exercise. So you need to spend 15 minutes to figure out how to do this on your own, and then we'll talk about it. Okay, we'll go through the solution. Okay. Now this is when we start to work with control flows such as for loops, right? If else. That's when things start to get a little bit more complex, and you have to actually start thinking, and how you're going to approach this. What is the data type you're dealing with, right? Is there an internal or temporary data structure you would like to create? Right? So again, the goal here is that we would like to, we have a list of skills, right? Unfortunately, this is not Excel. We cannot just select this column and then just sum them up. And I'll tell you that this is actually available in Pandas data frame, right? So when we work with data frame, it becomes super easy. But we're learning how to work with the basic, data types in Python, right? They're very flexible. There are good use cases for them. But as I said, this is not the best way to do data analysis. And as you can see, write 10 lines of code. While in Excel, you just need to do the 1 click or 2 clicks, right? That's when Excel can still beat Python. But very soon you'll realize that Python is actually more flexible. I wouldn't say it's better because it depends on the use case. okay? So we would like to get basically the second column, but looks like there's no straightforward way for us to directly get that. So we have to basically go through this list one by one. So we'll go through, start with the first element, and then we extract one, and then we go to the second row, or in this case, the second element in this list, which is a tuple, and then we extract the second column or second element from this tuple, and then we move on to the third, move on to the fourth. Now you realize that you're, first of all, iterating through this list. You go from the beginning to the end. You're going to do something, apply exactly the same operations to every element in this list, because, in that for loop, right, the block of code, right, that applies to every element. So whatever you do with the for loop, that functions or a couple of lines of code in that block, it gets applied to every element that you go through, right? Exactly the same. But we're also temporarily going to extract the second element, which is number of months it takes to learn something. Well, we need a place to sort of hold this, right? There are two ways to do this. Or maybe we'll just do the computation at the same time. Like when we go through the first row, we say, okay, it's 1. We memorize that. And then we go to the second row, we say, okay, it's 2. Now we need to do 1 plus 2. And then we move on to the third. It's 1. Then it's 3 plus 1. We know it's 4. So as we iterate through the third, right, row, we know that the cumulative sum now is 4. We sort of always update this value, which is the total number of months so far, which is 4. We move on to the next row, it becomes 7, it becomes 10, it becomes 13 at the end. So it's like you need a temporary container just to keep track of this temporary sum, right? That's one way to do that. Another way to do that is, well, can we just put this in another list or tuple? So we get a tuple or a list with all the values, and then we just sum them up directly, right? So there are two ways to do this, right? Okay, let's try the first one. First of all, we know that, I think that there's a question here, total number of months. Okay, so let's do the iteration, right? For, I'm going to put a question mark here first, okay? In switch to DS. Okay, we know in is a keyword. Okay, it checks if something is in a string, but in this case, it's actually iterating through. This is part of the for loop. Okay, iterating through the list. Now, the question mark here is that we use a temporary variable, and some people just call that element. So basically, for an item, or you'll see very often you'll see I. That means an item. For an item in this list, we're going to do something about this item. Let's say I'm going to print I. Let's run that. Oh, I didn't run this. So let me run this. When you see name error, name is not defined. It just means that you have not run that cell, or this variable has not been materialized. So it has not been created yet. So it's a name error. So you just need to run this, right? And then run the for loop, print. And sometimes when you copy code from an HTML page, from a web page, you would like to paste that into your notebook. You may find like it only has like 2 spaces. Okay, it has 2 spaces. It's still gonna run, right? But as you can see, the print is supposed to be a keyword. It's supposed to look green, but it's red here. It's just Python telling you, or Notebook telling you, that you actually don't have the correct indentation. It still runs, but ideally it's 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. All right. So that's probably the easiest for loop we're gonna run, right? But now we would like to change the name. I'm gonna tell you the name doesn't matter. It just creates a temporary variable, and inside this block, right, this temporary variable name is going to represent each element, each tuple. Okay, as you go through the looping, E is going to be assigned these values, right? So I'm just going to call this, well, let's just use E. It doesn't matter in this case, okay? All right. All right. So the goal here is to get the total number of months, right? So we can, of course, print the element. That's no problem. Maybe I'll just use I, which is more common. You're probably more used to it. Let's just print I. For each item, we would like to get the second type, right? So what about we print the type of item? It tells you that, first of all, you see 6 of them. They're class tuple, right? So they're basically the tuple data type, because inside this list, each element is a tuple, right? So we know that if we would like to get the second one, it's a tuple, and then we can use index. And what is the index we should use for the second element? I subscription index, let's try 2. Complaining, as I told you, you're going to see this a lot, index error. Looks like there's no such index as 2, because it only has 2 elements and Python is 0 index based. So let's try 1. Now it's returning the second column, right? So that's what we need. But the problem here is that we don't want to print it out. We want to sum them up, right? So what we can do here is, remember, we need a temporary container just to store the temporary value, right? So let's say the total number of months, right? We'll just say equals 0. So this means that we're initializing it to be 0, right? And then we're going to keep adding value to it, okay? So let's say we print I subscript 1. That's going to print 1 and then 2 and 1, right? But we also want to add total months equal total months plus. So that means it starts from 0. I would like to add this 1, which is I access index 1. Okay. There's, of course, an easier way to do this, which is plus equal. Okay. But it's equivalent. It's the same as total months plus. Right? It's just more elegant and more convenient. Okay. So to begin with, right? Let's say we have here. Total months equals 0. And when we are on I equal, right, the first tuple, we get the value 1. So we would like to add, right, that to 0. So it's 0 plus this value is 1, supposed to be 1, right? So we get 1 and we reassign that to the same variable. Now, total underscore months, the value becomes 1. Okay. And the best way to sort of learn and debug this, and sometimes it doesn't work out, we always add print. So how about, like, we want to know the temporary value of this total months and just print it out. Okay. All right, let's do that. So it starts with 1 and the cumulative value becomes 1, which is 0 plus 1, right? And it moves on to be 3 and 4. Now, this is not very easy to read. So why don't we use the string formatting? Okay, so what we can do here is that we're going to print, let's say, this is something new. I don't think I introduced the string format, but it should be pretty straightforward. So let's say let's say month, right? Colon. Okay. So this is called string formatting. But basically it prints out month colon space, right? And this is like a placeholder. Okay. Let's say I'm just going to call that M, right? And then format M equal. So this basically means that I would like to print out the value of I index 1 with this string. Okay. You can use the F string as well, but let's finish this first and we'll explain that. Okay. Let's say this is, let's say, the temporary sum, right? Dot format, and it provide this variable. Let's run this first and you understand it. Okay. So months colon, right? The placeholder is I1, index 1. So to begin with, it's month 1, next iteration, months 2, next iteration, back to months 1, months 3, because I think it's 1, 2, 1, 3. You know what? Let me change this to be a bigger number. Let's say 5, right, 7. So it's relatively easier to understand. The 113 is kind of confusing. Let's try this again. The first skill it takes 1 month. Let's say it's becoming harder and harder, and then move on to the second month, right? And month 5, month 7, it takes 9 months and 11 months. Okay, but as you can see, the temporary sum is increasing. Okay, and it starts with 0, and that's why it's total sum equals 0 plus 1, and you get 1. Okay, oh, it becomes 1, right? And in the next iteration, it's basically 1 plus 2 gives you 3, and then 3 plus 5 gives you 8, 8 plus 7 gives you 15, 15 plus 9, 24, right? So that's how you get the total sum. And then in the end, you can print out the total sum. Okay. This total months is a variable defined outside of this loop, right? So let's print, let's say, total number of months it takes to become a data scientist. Dot format total months, right? Looks like it's 35 months. That's too long, right? The value doesn't matter here, but I hope you understand, like, you know, how we can do for loop now. Okay, this is the first approach, which is to just increment this value. Another way to do this, let's try it again. I'm going to move faster this time. Let's say instead of calculating the value on the fly, let's just put everything into a container. Let's say months, right? Equal an empty list. And let's iterate through this list. And then we just do months dot append I index 1. Okay. So this months start with empty list. And then we just, every time we extract the number of months in that tuple, in one tuple, we append this second column, right, to the months. Let's print that out. That's what we get. 1, 2, 5, 7, 9, 11. And if you would like to get the sum, it's 35. That's another way to do this, okay? All right. Now, I think we covered a little bit string formatting. Well, one last thing I would like to teach you is the list comprehension, okay? List comprehension is very convenient, and its performance is actually sometimes better than the for loops. Now, one thing I would like to let you know that for loops always very slow, right? It's very convenient, it's powerful, But when you use for loops, like whenever you're using for loops to process data, you should expect that to be relatively slow because there are better ways to, or more efficient ways to process data. Some sort of vectorized computation, right, that leverages multiple CPU cores. When you do for loop, if you have 12 CPU cores, it's only using one CPU core because it has to run things sequentially. Okay, that's sort of just how it's implemented in Python. So for loop is always slow, but when you use it to run the control logic, it's fine because you sort of need to iterate through the list and do something about it, right? But if you have like a large chunk of data and you just want to iterate that through that row by row, there are actually more efficient way to do that in NumPy, which is another data type. Okay. But it works most of the time. You wouldn't run into bottleneck that easily with for loops. But there are more elegant ways of writing for loops, right? So here we did this. I just want to let you know that there's something called comprehensions in Python that you don't even have to write for loops. All you need to do is just use a square bracket, right? And if it's a comprehension, you're basically telling Python that the expected output of this comprehension is a list, okay? And I'm going to run a function to do something, right? For I in this list, switch to DS. It can actually do it in one line, but of course it cannot be very complicated logic, right? It's basically just running a simple function. So let's say I index 1, right? Now this is equivalent to the for loop. For I in switch to underscore DS, print I1, right? That's what we get. Let's run this. You get this. It's the same, right? But it returns a list. It doesn't really print them out, okay? Which means if we would like to get the total months, you just need to add sum, and that's it. You get 35. So you write less lines of code, right? So the solution is definitely more elegant, and it's going to be faster than for loop in general. When are you not going to use this? Well, when you have very complex logic and you're going to have a lot of lines of code, then you better just do a for loop, which is much easier to read, because doing this using list comprehension could be a nightmare. But of course, you can define a function or something like that. But just so you know that there's something called comprehensions. You can do list comprehensions, but if you wrap it in the curly braces, then it's sort of creating a dictionary. But here we're not. Oh, sorry. Now this is like a set. But if you can provide key value pairs as well. But I don't have the key here, but just so you know, you have something called dictionary comprehension. If you provide the key value pair, like you have a key colon value, and then it's going to actually create a dictionary. Okay. All right. So it's time for us to work on this exercise. This time, I'm actually going to give you 15 to 20 minutes. I think it just takes me half an hour to go through this exercise solution. So I'd like to give you 15 minutes, and then at the meantime, I'll try to address some of the questions. But here's the expectation, okay? I'd like everyone to read a text file. I'll need to teach you how to do that, by the way. So let me show you this text file. Data science career guide .txt. And here's what I did, okay? And let me explain what I'd like us to do here. There's a data science career guide, right, page. career guides data scientist, right, that we wrote. So I basically went to these pages, but in practice, you can do web scraping, right? I just did this manually. I just copy and paste, right, the entire text. Oh, sorry. Let's say I just select all the text. Oh, what happened? I select all of them, and I just paste them into Excel. Into a text file. Okay, so as you can see, this is the entire text block for what is data science. Okay, and my second row is what is a data scientist, and the third row, I think I have 6 to 7 rows, and each row is basically one page, the text from that one page. Okay, and my goal here is that, well, this is too long. Can we ask ChatGPT or OpenAI to summarize that for me, so I don't have to spend an hour going through this? Instead, I just spend 5 minutes, right? We're all busy. So maybe you want to do some text summarization. So that's what we can do here, which means it's a loop, because we have 7 pages, and in the text file, we have 7 rows. Okay, it looks like there are many rows, but if you look at the index here, there are actually only 6 rows, right? And it's really just a very long string. Let me remove the word wrap. Now this makes more sense. It basically has 7 rows, right? So that is what we would like to submit to ChatGPT, okay, and get the text summarized. So the expected output will basically be the summarized career guide. We're supposed to see 7 of them because each page is talking about something different. So we basically need to read all the text, right, from this text file. And we would like to print out, first of all, print out the number of characters per row. Okay. And then use the OpenAI API to summarize each row. And I have some hint for you because we did it last time, right? We basically just need to call OpenAPI.completion.create, provide the model. We're going to just use the default model, right? This one, and then you need to provide the prompt. Now, this prompt is what you need to complete in your loop, right? And I can tell you it's supposed to be something like okay. Equal summarize the following text, or summarize this document for me, or for a 7-year-old, for example. You want to make it as easy as possible, right? And then colon, right? And then you basically paste your blob of text here. Okay, so that's what you're going to send to ChatGPT. But this string, substring, is always going to be the same. And all we are changing is one of those text pages, right? Okay, so that's what you need to do in the for loop. And you can use string concatenation. You can use plus, the plus sign, to add them up, right? Okay. All right. So we can leave the rest of them by default. The max tokens here is basically like how many tokens you want it to be summarized, right? And you can increase that if you want longer, answers. Okay. So yeah, we have half an hour left, but I think I still need to teach you how to read a file. So let me go through that, and I'll let you guys work on the for loop. Okay. How do we read a file? First of all, you need to make sure that this file is in the same folder. So just copy and paste that file into the folder where you run the Jupyter Notebook. Now, in my case, it should be in the same folder. I have this file. So let's say I'm just going to load career guide. Oh, career guides equal. I'm just going to use the old-fashioned way, just to use open, okay? Instead of using the with open. And I would like to explain to you how things are read into Python. Okay, so open, and it just provide the path to the file. Okay, this is supposed to be like path to your file.txt. In my case, it's in the same folder. So I'll just find the file name, dscareerguide.txt. Okay, so ds career underscore guide.txt. Okay, so that means we're going to open the file, but we have not read it yet. What it does is it's going to open something called a reader. Let's print this out. Again, it's an object, even though in this case it doesn't really print out the text. We're hoping to see the text, but it doesn't. But it's telling us that, well, this is right a text IO wrapper. Name of the file, the mode is read, right? So we're open to read a file, but we can open a file to write to, like, you can write to this file as well, right? An encoding method and stuff like that. So okay, so now we have the career guides. So how about we iterate through this? So for line in career guides, because imagine you're opening a file, you're going to read that line by line, right? So for line in career guides, let's just print it out. Okay. It's going to print out a lot of text. Okay. But it print out all 7 of them, all 7 lines, right? But the first question is, I'd like you to print the number of characters per row or per line. So I'm not going to give you the solution, but we're almost close to the solution, okay? But that's one way to do that, okay? Using the for loop. But a better way is sometimes just to read that into memory. So we'll say lines equal career guides, okay? Dot. So career guides is an object, right? That has a bunch of method as well, okay? It has buffer. It's basically you can control how fast you would like to read, right? There's something called, well, we're reading things. Looks like there are like 4 different kinds. The read, readable, read line, read lines. They're actually different. Okay, so well, let's try this method read. Okay, and we get lines. So let's print that out. Oh. Okay, a little bit finicky here. So what happened here is that you see like an empty string when I print it out, right? So it opens the reader, and if we run career guide.read, it only reads that once, and then it closes the string, right? And then if you run that the second time, it's both basically going to give you an empty string. So you have to always run them together, okay? What we're seeing here is that lines now becomes a giant string. So it basically reads the entire text into memory as a big string. So all 7 lines now got put into one big string. So you sort of need to figure out how to separate the lines, right? And process each row or each line separately. Sometimes you do it this way, but you can't really do this on really large documents because it's limited by the amount of memory you have, right? So I usually don't do this, but there might be some use cases where you want to know all the characters available in this text file. Then you just use .read, and you can just get the, right? So length, it's gonna, right? It's looks like we have 68,000, right, characters. Okay. But there's another thing called read lines. That's what I usually prefer. Okay. Oh, sorry. I have to run that again. Open, read lines, right? And the lines now becomes a list of strings. Now, this is what I like you guys to do because we're practicing for loops, right? You're going to read the 6 lines in the text, right, into a list by using .read lines. And then you have a list. I'd like you guys to iterate through this because each row or each element in this list is basically the career guide, one of the career guide page. I'd like you guys to submit this, right, in your for loop to OpenAI API and get that summarized. And then you have to keep the summarized text somewhere so you can print it out later. So yeah, off you go. This is the lab or the exercise we can do. So I'll give you guys 10 minutes and I'll check in and see if you guys have completed. If not, I'll give you more 5 more minutes and then we'll go through the solution. It shouldn't take longer than 5 minutes. Okay. All right, let's get started. And I'll look into some of those questions. Okay. Just checking in here. How are you guys doing? Do you need more time? 0 if you're done, and 1 if you need more time. Okay, we'll spend 5 more minutes on this, and I'll go through the solution. If you're getting the error message, no API key provided, that means you haven't provided an API key. What you can do is, you do need to have an OpenAI account. So go to OpenAI. Um, OpenAI AI login. And can use Gmail to log in or create a new account. Go to API. Okay, so basically the link is platform. .openai.com. And then you go to like settings, click on the top right corner, click on your name, and then choose view API keys. And then you can just, create a new secret key and give it a name. Test, create secret key. You'll only be able to see this once. So just copy this. Now in your case, just go to the Jupyter notebook. You can hard code it, but it's not recommended. But in this case, instead of using os.getInv, that basically try to get an environment variable called OpenAI API key. You have to set the environment variable. In Windows, you have to go to advanced settings and set the environment variable. In Mac, there's a different way to do that. But in this case, just hard code it, and it's a string, and that should work. I'll give you my key so you can give it a test. Okay, I think it's time to go through the solution. So yeah, you can keep trying, or you can, you can pause and just watch I code, and I'll share the solution with you later. Okay. There are 4 steps. First step is to read file. I think I give you the instructions already. So let me put them into the same cell. Let's say we need to read the file first, right? And use read lines. So the lines is basically a list, right? Print the length of each career guide page, or basically each row. Then we're going to do a for loop. So for line in lines, again, however you want to name it, you can use I. But since we have the plural form here, I'll just use line in lines. And then we will basically print the length of the line. You need to make sure that the line is actually I think it's a string, right? So let's give it a try. And that prints out it looks like the second one and the last one has more text, right? And it's longer. The first one is pretty short. So that's the basic, practice of for loops. And then we move on to the OpenAI part, which is text summarization. So let's do that. I'm going to copy this block of text. So all right. So again, we need to iterate through, right, the list of rows. So for line in lines, okay, to make it more complete, maybe I'll just add these here as well. Here it's set the OpenAI API key. It's always good to sort of add some descriptions or comments so people can understand what you're trying to do. Right? Let's say read the file. Okay. Okay. Now for loops, right? We run through this. Now, what do we want to do for each line? We would like to create the prompt because we need to give instructions. We need to let OpenAI know what we would like to do, even though we're going to submit the text. But if we don't give the context, it doesn't know what tasks to perform. So let's say we're going to do, let's say the prompt. So the prompt question equal, let's say, summarize the following document for a for someone who wants to become a data scientist, right? We can add a \n, which is a special character. It's escaping, right? Which means it's a new line. So basically, what we are actually going to submit, like as if you're using like ChatGPT, and it's going to be a new line, right? And then you're going to provide basically the text, right? The career guide text. Okay, that's what we're going to do. So that's a substring. We would like to plus the actual text, which is the line. So add line. Okay. And sometimes as you start to code more, right, more lines of code, and you sort of just lose track of things, you're not even sure whether this line is producing what you want. The best way to do that, since you're doing this interactively in a prompt, then just use print prompt question. Okay. And let's just do that. Okay. All right. So we get the first one back. Summarize the following document for someone who wants to become a data scientist, and then followed by the text. So basically, that's what we're going to submit to OpenAI. So now we can just comment this out. Now, you don't have to remove that because we may come back and debug it again. So let's just add a # here, right? And then Python is going to escape this. It will treat as a comment. It will not run this line. Okay, so you can always use a #. I think I forgot to mention that, but you can. This is how you write the comment, but you can, you know, use the command or control / and it will automatically sort of comment and uncomment it. Okay. Yeah. And then we're going to submit the question. All right. So, and when you're running loops, then, you know, we're only dealing with 7 lines, which is fine. But what if the data you're dealing with is like 1 million, right? You probably don't want to run this unless you're sure that it's producing the results you want. So maybe just test that with 1 line. How do we do that? Remember, lines is a is a list. Why don't we just use index, right, to get a range of values, let's say for 2. Right. What does this give us? That gives us the first 2, right? And it's still a list. Okay. So you can, if you have like 1,000 rows, maybe just test it on the first 2. That's one way to do that. okay? And then we're going to submit do the API call, right? So this is where we need the response, this block of code. So I'm going to come back and do this. Now, sometimes after you copy and paste, this indentation is messed up, okay? First of all, there's a colon here. So whatever that's beneath this line is supposed to be right here, a block of code, right? So we have to fix the indentation, okay? Okay, so this is better. Right, we're submitting this and we're getting the response, right? But this response is the response for each line. Right? We have 7 lines. It's the response for each line. Now, remember the question is we would like to get all of them, right? Print, well, you can print that, or if you would like to save it, then you have to put that into a list, right? So you have to create a new list and use that to save the summarized information. But let's just print that out for now. So we're gonna print response. Now, and let's do that. Okay. Am I doing this correctly? Looking at this again. So there's one thing we need to change. So first of all, remember that this completion.create, this OpenAI in a function, right? There are 2 mandatory arguments. One is a model and prompt. So we have to always select model and provide the prompt. The rest of them, you can leave them as a default. We can read the documentation to understand this more. But the prompt here, so first of all, using prompt equal prompt is confusing. First of all, this prompt, right? You're basically assigning the prompt, the actual prompt. You would like to send open the API and assign that to this prompt as an argument, right? That's the parameter name. So it's not suggested. So let's use prompt question. Now this will be less confusing, right? So we form or create this prompt question and we submit it, right? Use that as the prompt to submit to the API. Okay, so let's run this. You see this asterisk here? That means it's still running. Looks like it's done now. All right. So we get something back. We print out the response, but we did that twice because we're processing the first 2 lines, right? That's what we are getting. We're getting, this is the first one that got printed out, right? So we have the query ID. That's the summarized text. But looks like it got limited by, it doesn't print all of them. Data scientists are interdisciplinary roles that need good programming and cloud computing skills, math, and an understanding of statistics. I think it's doing a pretty good job. Requirements vary depending on the position, but can include data munging, working with Linux command, using AWS Azure Cloud Platforms, and writing coding language. But I don't think it did a good job on this part, unless we focused on this. I think we definitely mentioned that as a data scientist, you need to know some like cloud computing stuff, and you need to know Linux command line. But when it does the summarization, it looks like these are the important things. So you see, it's still not smart enough. And text summarization is hard because you have to understand the meaning. And ChatGPT, or I mean, the OpenAI is really just predicting this next word. But overall, I think it does a pretty good job. So now we just want to get the text. And today we learned dictionary, right? And we know that this is a dictionary. Let me actually create this. And so we assign this to a dictionary. Response equal, right? Oh, okay. know what, I'll just, okay. So here's the response. And let's get the type of this response. You gotta be a dictionary. When we have a new dictionary, what do? We want to know the keys. So it has ID, object, created, model, choices, usage. Let's go to the response. Looks like what we need is text. It's in choices. And when you work with dictionary, you notice that it's very much nested structure. You have the keys, choices, and the results. The value is a list. It looks like in this list, there's only one element, right? But you can definitely have more choices. And then the first element in this list is also a dictionary. And this dictionary has keys text, which is what we want. It has index, right? It has finished reason. Looks like it hit the length, limit. That's why the sentence didn't even complete. But yeah, so what if we just want to extract the actual text, right? So now we know the keys and we know it's choices and it's a dictionary, right? So we provide the key, okay? This is how you do it step by step, right? Let's just explore that. And now this gives us a list of dictionary. We only have one. So just verify that by using length. That gives us, length is 1, right? So basically we have one element list, okay? Now we would like to access this element in this list. So we have to use index. Remember, this is now a list data type. And we're going to use the index again. We're going to index the first. This is what we'd like to access, the dictionary, right? So we get the value of a dictionary, which is a list. Now we're accessing the first element in that list. If you run type, the type is going to be dictionary again, right? Remove the type. It's the dictionary we are getting back. Finally, we're trying to get text. Again, square bracket. Now we provide the keys because it's a dictionary. We get the text. So now this is the summarized text. Okay, we're going to bring this back here in our for loop. Okay, we don't want the response. We just want the text part. Okay, now let's do that again. And unfortunately, we're going to make an API call again, right? Sometimes you want to avoid this because we're doing the same thing over and over, and we're paying OpenAI, right? Even though we're not hitting the quota, so it's still free. Okay. So I'm running this. Okay. So we got the response back, and I just realized that I only got 2. And we remove this because we're iterating through the entire career guide, right? So this is the first one. There you go. You have a summarized and shortened data scientist career guide. And hopefully after you read this, you understand how to become a data scientist. Okay. And as you can see, this is, automation is very powerful, right? But of course here, the text is not completed. So you have to tweak the parameters to sort of improve I think, 64 is really small. So I think the parameter here we set max token 64. So you definitely need to increase that, but just tweak it and you'll get the results you want. Okay. All right, cool. That's it for the second Python lecture. In this lecture, I think we learned, list and dictionary. Those are probably 2 most important ones. And then we learned how to iterate through list. So we can write for loops. So in the next lecture, we'll be talking about, functions So we'll keep building on this and try to write some functions and to improve that. And if we have more time, we'll start the pandas. So we probably have 1 hour, sorry, one lecture or a 1.5 lecture to cover pandas, so we can get started with data analysis. Yeah, but that's it for today. And thanks for attending and staying till the end. I'll see you guys on Friday. Thanks, guys. Oh, there's a question. API key works, but mine does not, even though I have tried to generate multiple times. I honestly don't know why. Did you follow exactly the same approach? I'm assuming you did. But did you try to because I think we tried the hard coding part, right? So when you switch this key with your own, it doesn't work? Or are you saying that like when you're trying to use os.getIm, it doesn't work? Oh, yeah, if you guys have questions, feel free to ask in the Q&A section. Oh, that's odd. I don't think I have a good answer at this point. Where you like if the key doesn't work. Huh, that's odd. Oh, do you mind just sending me your key and I'll give it a try on my computer and see if that works? Any other questions? Oh, I think your issue here, it's a new error. It's called rate limit error. So I think what that means, so first of all, this error message is pretty long. By looking at the top, it sort of give you a hint what this error is about. You don't always need to read all the details, but at the bottom, definitely you'll find something you need. It says you exceeded your current quota. Check your plan and billing details. So it looks like you have been using it for more queries than, because you have a free plan. So it's basically asking you to sort of start paying them. Yeah. Because it's not a free tool. Yeah. But it's working. It's just like hitting the rate limit, and that's why you cannot do it. I'm not sure about mine. Like mine might be a paid version. Yeah. Can you give some use cases for list comprehension? List comprehension is the same as for loop. It's just a more elegant way of writing loops. And you can do like dictionary comprehension as well. I would say whenever you have a for loop that you think you can finish in one line, then you can consider list comprehension. Or because when you have, let's say, for I in your list, right? And then you know, let's say you're gonna run a lot of functions, right? If that's what your code looks like, or then you probably just stick with like a for loop, I would say. But if you think that you can finish everything just in one, right? For I in your, let's say, list. And then you can also add some conditionals like if I length I is greater than 3 or something. That's just a one-liner. That's a little bit faster than list. Yeah. And if I'm not mistaken, it's quite unique to Python. Can you go through how to debug and read error message? Usually I just look at, first of all, the error message name. It could be like a, index out of, index, it could be index error. It could be like rate limit error, right? And if you're not sure exactly what happened, I would just come to the bottom. Usually like this text here, right? Most of the time it's not that useful because it's really just looking into the code behind this, right? Behind the API. So this here, it means that this is the code that you submitted. Right? It says the cell, and this is the code you submitted, right? And okay, so it's calling OpenAI.completion. This is where that module, you can find the completion.py, right? And then there's the function called .create, okay? And this is the actual code, okay? This is a little bit complex, but this is like a snippet of the completion.py. And it's really just trying to find, okay, this is the part that gives the error. And it's the .create function that we're running here, right? Okay. But in the end, it's basically going to tell you that is the rate limit error. So this part of the code is probably most useful. If you cannot understand it, I would just Google. I would just copy this and Google, and it will tell you. Most of the time, you'll find people with similar questions or run into the similar errors, and then you can just Google and find similar answers. You can try ChatGPT as well. It might work. But I just feel like doing all kinds of prompting to make ChatGPT doing a good job answering your questions, you might as well just Google. But in some scenarios, like text summarization, like what we did here, and absolutely like OpenAI is doing amazing job, right? But I would just Google. And also at the beginning of your learning journey, I would recommend you just get more comfortable with reading the error message, because sometimes the error message is very obvious. Like you can just read it and understand what happened. Try to force yourself to Google and read other people's comments on Stack Overflow. That sort of over time, it helps you build up the problem solving confidence. So like whenever you see an error message, you're not going to panic. You know that by Googling, you will fix the problem. I think that's all you need. And programming is more about just doing more practice, and you'll get better over time and work on projects, right? You never memorize all of these like, commands and error messages. But that's what Google is here for. Like, it should take advantage of that, I think. But there's no point of like just digging into the code. Like, I think that's for very advanced users. Most of the time you would probably just Google and figure out why. But this one is pretty obvious. But there are some tricky ones then you wouldn't be able to understand than just Google. Yeah. Okay. I think previously there were also some questions about dictionaries. I think it's, for example, how to delete, let's say we have a dictionary. How do we delete a key value pair? I think what we can do is just use the DEL, the delete, like it's the, it's a keyword, right? Just delete, and then provide the key. And that will remove the key and associated value. So if you look at this list dictionary again, then machine learning is gone. You only have analytics and business and big data. And also dictionary keys are supposed to be unique. So you won't be able to have like duplicated keys like what we have in list. So in a way that this is kind of similar to set, right? It keeps the unique value. But in this case, in the dictionary's case, it's a unique key. But what if you have multiple like duplicate keys? Well, it's going to overwrite the. So here's one example. Let's say, sorry. Let's say we would like to create. Let's say we have a list of list. Let's say we have a. What's the? Okay, you know what? We'll create a list of tuples. Okay, so that means we have A value 1, and we have B value 2, and then let's say we have B value 3. Okay, that's a list of tuple, and we can actually convert this to dictionary by using the dict function. Remember, we tried set and list today. Right, dict is basically going to convert a list into dictionary, but you need to sort of specify what is the key. By default, it's always going to use the first element in the tuple as the key and the second as the value. So I'm just going to paste it in here, right? And it's going to convert that into a dictionary. But you also notice that we have B2, B3 twice, and you notice that the B:3 is basically replacing the B:2. So it basically, creates, when it's the first time it sees the key B, it creates the B:2, which is valid 2. And then it sees B again, and it's going to update that and replace 2 with 3. That's basically how it works. But you're not going to have duplicate keys. There's only one unique key for each value. What if only want to delete one value from the list of values, not the whole keys? Then you'll have to use the update. So remember dictionary has an update, right? So you just do the update, use the dictionary.update, and you just update the value with the new list, for example. I think that's one way to do that. Okay, cool. It's 25 minutes past 10. I think it's time to conclude this session, and I'll see you guys on Friday. If you have any questions, you can send that to Discord. And yeah, I hope to see you guys soon. Have a good evening.